Hey Waffle Gang, I do hope you're well. My name is Mark and today we're checking out some more relationship stories, and if you do love a Reddit story, why not consider hitting that like, subscribe, maybe that notification bell too. But let's crack on with today's first story. Now, today's first story is one we have covered in the past, but now comes with a final update as well. It's from the Am I the A-Hole subreddit from Lightning STR, who says, "Am I the a-hole for raining on my cousin's parade regarding the name she picked out for her baby? My cousin Stephanie and I are really more friends than relatives. An important note is that she's not really online much, so can be out of the loop on certain memes and jokes in internet culture. And to be honest, doesn't really understand the concept of viral references or how they work. Stephanie is pregnant, just found out is going to be a girl. About a week ago, she told a gathering of her best girlfriends that she's going to name her daughter Karen. The room instantly went cold, but after an awkward silence, everyone else politely said it was lovely. I couldn't bring myself to respond at all. Later in the evening, when Stephanie was out of the room, everyone was immediately like, oh my god, that poor kid. Why would she pick Karen of all names? I was uncomfortable with this conversation, given that everyone had been so positive about the name to her face. I thought more about it over the next couple of days and just felt really weird about the whole thing. The name is really loaded, to the point it could be detrimental to the baby, and Stephanie had no idea of the connotations to make an informed decision. So a couple of days later, I tentatively brought it up. I told her I was so excited for the baby, just wanted her to have all available information when picking a name. I then started to explain that Karen had some negative connotations and has become sort of an internet joke to describe a specific kind of entitled middle-aged woman. Stephanie instantly was furious and started talking over me, saying, "Why are you saying this? This is so mean." I was really surprised by her reaction. It felt very, very out of character. So I immediately stopped and said, "I'm really sorry. I didn't mean to hurt your feelings. I just wanted to tell you something I thought you might not know." She replied, "That's the name I picked for my daughter, and you think I picked it as some kind of joke? I don't understand why you'd say something so hurtful." When she said that, I felt like it signaled that she didn't really understand what I was trying to tell her. So after agonizing for a second about whether to press the issue even though she was so angry, I felt like in for a penny, in for a pound, and since she was already mad, I wanted her to at least understand what I was trying to explain to her. I googled "Karen know your meme" on my phone and tried to show her the screen of results while saying, "Look, I'm just saying there's more meaning to the name than you may realize." She stood up, pushed my phone away and shouted, "Wow!" She then stormed out of my home and drove away. My aunt and mum had been berating me all week because Stephanie told them I made fun of her baby name. Stephanie has not spoken to me or responded to my texts since. I can take a hint, and I'm not going to broach a topic again that caused so much distress, but I keep going back and forth on whether I was the a-hole here by bringing it up in the first place. And when this post originally came out on Am I the A-Hole, it was overwhelmingly voted "You're the A-Hole." So here's a couple of example comments before we move on to those updates. So Eaton Reed says, "You're the A-Hole. You really think it's going to matter when this kid's older? It's a meme. Oh, and for anyone pregnant or planning to have kids, this is why you don't reveal the name until they are born. Someone always got something stupid to say, no matter what." And before I continue with these comments were 4 years ago. This is in 2023, just in case you're watching this in some future year. But Elise says, "You're the a-hole. I'm aware of the Karen meme, but come on, it's a totally normal name. I can't believe so many of you would take a meme so seriously." Then OP's seen the update since and said, "ETA, guys, please calm down and stop messaging me about what a terrible person I am every time there is an update to this story. Obviously, I didn't think the name Karen was going to end up with an even more negative connotation than it had several years ago, or that it would be so mainstream. I don't even understand how this fairly tame 2-sentence comment I made 3 years ago has elicited so many aggressive reactions." Helen said, "No one's an a-hole here. You were just informing her of the connotations surrounding the name." Rotty says, "You and all the others are assholes. Grow up. You think Karen is even remembered in 10 years. Guess you're some sort of Karen." And one more comment, which is from Mrs. Valentine, who says, "You're the a-hole. Karen is a completely normal name. You are acting as if your cousin has committed a faux pas on par with naming her baby Adolf, when in reality the name Karen really carries very little connotation at all, and certainly nothing that will be remembered by the time Stephanie's kid is a middle-aged woman. Nobody with half a brain is marching around with the assumption that all Karens are rude and entitled. The same way nobody with half a brain is marching around thinking all boys called Harry are wizards, or anyone with the surname Bond is a womanizer. So yes, you're the a-hole, because your comments were completely uncalled for considering you were supposed to be a friend. Perhaps you should take a leaf out of your cousin's book and spend less time online in order to get some perspective. So OP then edited the post and says, "Thanks everyone. I've been properly schooled and I accept my judgment that I was the a-hole here. Stephanie and I have a history of being extremely open and honest with each other. I was the maid of honor in her wedding, which we planned on being the case from a young age, and we always joked as teenagers that part of my duties would include taking her out of the marriage if the groom she picked sucked. And so maybe I was too flippant with approaching this topic due to our history, and was unempathetic in underestimating how much she was already invested in the name she chose for her future daughter. I admit, I'm a bit frustrated that Stephanie still doesn't understand what I was trying to tell her. She still thinks I was making some kind of weird, cruel joke accusing her of picking the name as a joke. But I have messaged her a sincere apology that she accepted, and I will never speak of this again to Stephanie or baby Karen. I'll also stand up for Stephanie if her other friends shit talk the name around me again. If they are not willing to voice their thoughts to Stephanie directly, they need to not say the kind of things they were saying behind her back." Edit 2. One more thing. I definitely was not trying to tell Stephanie not to name her daughter Karen. I just wanted her to make the decision either way, knowing the connotations. Since I'd want someone to do the same for me if I picked a baby name with cultural baggage I wasn't aware of. I realize now I handled it poorly and was hurtful to Stephanie in the process, but I just wanted to be clear that I wasn't actively trying to talk her out of the name. I just didn't want her to be blindsided if it came up later. One more comment from OP, who said Stephanie and her husband have a deal on baby names where she picks girls' baby names and he picks boy baby names, and they each have unlimited veto power for the other person's choices. He's on board with Karen as far as I know. We're all the same age, late 20s, but neither of them spends time online or is even particularly tech savvy. So the first update came a year later, and said my post last summer wasn't the most exciting or dramatic on Am I the A-hole, but I wanted to provide an update if anyone is interested. Baby Karen was born healthy and happy back in October. She's an absolute sweetheart of a baby, and I'm totally in love with her. Between March and May, I didn't get to see her at all in person, but I was doing regular FaceTime/house party calls with Stephanie and Karen. And over the last few weeks, I've been going over to Stephanie's house to sit in her backyard and chat with Stephanie/coo at Karen from a lengthy distance. I have two reasons for updating. First, I just realized since Karen's birth that her name has now taken on new meaning to me. When I'm with her, Karen just means her, and I didn't think about the other connotations. In other words, you guys were right. That said though, my second reason for updating is that Stephanie got back into her years unused Facebook at the beginning of the pandemic to keep in touch with people. She's been on it pretty regularly lately for the first time in years. Historically, she's not been into social media. Most people in our area/social circle have been posting heavily about BLM and the protests happening right now, as well as racial justice issues more generally. As a result, Stephanie has now come into contact with a deluge of Karen memes for the first time and found them confusing and horrifying, especially the use of Karen as shorthand for a racist. I've basically just declined to talk about it with Stephanie because it went so poorly last time, but both my mother and her mother have hounded me about it because it's upsetting to Stephanie and said things like, "Is this what you were talking about before? Why didn't you say so? Why didn't you explain it better? You should have told Stephanie." And Jesus wept, you really can't win. Thanks again for all your feedback on my last post. It was very helpful in giving me some zen about the situation. Edit. Wow, I've been super overwhelmed by the flood of very kind, heartfelt PMs and just one or two not so kind ones, as well as the comments on my other post. Thank you everyone. It continually amazes me how nice and empathetic people frequent a sub devoted to arseholes. OP adds a comment on that post to someone who was criticizing Stephanie and said, to be fair, Stephanie's been cool about it. First, she saw a bunch of posts about the Central Park Karen, when the white lady was harassing the black birdwatcher in the park, and came to me asking me to explain why everyone was calling the woman Karen when her name was Amy. Since she's gotten back on Facebook, she often asks me to be like her internet culture interpreter. I immediately told her, sorry, I'm not having a conversation with you about this because we had a major conflict over it last year and I'm not getting into it with you. I think that was the first time she started to understand what I'd been telling her last year. In fairness to her, she didn't bring it up with me again after that. As for my mum and aunt, they are kind of generally ridiculous. They tend to be extremely reactive to whatever is going on precisely at that moment. And if someone in the family is upset, they get over-involved trying to fix it. Stephanie has been venting to her mum about this. Not about me, just how upsetting the memes are. And she and my mum have just been doing their normal thing of blowing it out of proportion. And now making it my fault somehow. I love my mum and aunt dearly, but they're not to be reasoned with. In response to another person criticizing Stephanie, OP says, honestly, with my mum and aunt, it's easier to just wait for them to move on to the next shiny thing. I don't blame Stephanie at all. She's just upset and confused, but hasn't made it my problem at all. My aunt and mum just have a flair for the dramatic. OP responds to someone else who still thought OP was the arsehole because they only brought up concerns with the name for selfish reasons. OP says, I probably wasn't clear about this in my original post, and I think it's probably because that's the part I cut down when I went way over the word limit on that first post. But when I described feeling weird and uncomfortable over the couple of days, I took to ruminate after Stephanie's announcement. The weirdness and discomfort was mostly a response to what happened with our friend group rather than just my own feelings about the name. I felt super uncomfortable being in the room while our friend shit-talked Stephanie's name choice after praising it to her face. I didn't have the presence of mind in the moment to call them out before the moment was past, and I sat with the guilt for a couple of days. I didn't want to tell Stephanie what they said because it would be tattly of me, and I also didn't want to cause conflict within the friend group or upset Stephanie. So raising the topic on my own seemed like a good compromise at the time. I did wrestle internally with how to handle it, and clearly I missed the mark. OP, in response to someone saying, do you understand there is a massive difference in being upset with your friends for their response and approaching Stephanie because you say you want her to be fully informed of her name choice. These are two different things that you are conflating. OP says, no, to be clear, I didn't raise the conversation with Stephanie in lieu of scolding our friends. I brought it up because I thought they owed it to her to raise those points to her face if they were going to say them at all. Ultimately, I thought Stephanie was owed the knowledge of those connotations, whatever she chose to do with that knowledge. Also, I don't know how to explain the context of our relationship, but Stephanie and I have a lifetime of shared radical honesty with one another. From the inconsequential, telling each other when outfits are unflattering, to the difficult, when she gave me a come to Jesus talk years ago about how someone I considered a close friend was super shitty to me and that I should end the friendship. Based on our extreme closeness and shared history, the conversation felt like the right move at the time, even though it ultimately backfired. 2 years on from the original post, OP updates again and says, hi all, I've gotten a few PMs over the last couple of years asking for updates, and since we just celebrated Karen's 3rd birthday, I wanted to circle back to anyone following this story. First of all, baby Karen, not so much a baby anymore, is doing amazingly on her developmental milestones. She's a very bright child, sharp as the sharpest tack and extremely tuned into her environment. Some of what she says is already fully in complete sentences, which just makes me want to cry when I hear it, because it seems like Stephanie was giving birth just yesterday. Karen loves books already and will intently study the pictures in them for huge stretches of time and claim to be reading. And you would not believe the uncomfortably incisive questions she's already asking. I'm fully convinced this child is going to grow up to be an actual genius. Regarding the name, unfortunately, when Karen started daycare earlier this year, she started getting grief for her name pretty quickly from the older kids. The daycare she attends mixes the ages together at a couple of different points throughout the day. And while there fortunately wasn't much direct bullying, 2 of the age 5s must have heard and internalized the derogatory connotations of the name Karen at home. As a result, they found her name absolutely hysterical. They kind of spread the idea to the other kids that there was something funny/wrong about her name. Karen was too little to understand what was happening, but found the other kids' behavior towards her generally upsetting. The daycare staff made every effort to shut it down and let Stephanie and her husband know right away. After about a month of this, where the daycare wasn't having much success putting the kibosh on this behavior, and the kids weren't dropping it, Stephanie and her husband made a decision that Karen would be going by Carrie from now on, which was already an established nickname that a lot of family and friends were already using, and that Karen already recognized as referring to herself. Stephanie and I never really fully revisited what happened during her pregnancy, but when she was telling me about what was happening in daycare, she apologized to me. I immediately felt terrible and reassured her there was no reason to apologize. Emotions are complicated when you're pregnant, and that I thought having Karen go by Carrie was a great solution. So changing what you're used to calling someone is fucking hard, I found, and I'm still directly addressing her on manual mode every single time. A lot of the responses I got on my last post were gleeful and leaned into the schadenfreude of the situation, and I have to say those responses really bummed me out. I would much rather live in a world where I was wrong about the impact Karen's name would have on her. I cannot emphasize enough what a sweet disposition, smart, curious, loving little girl Carrie is, and how much she deserves every good thing in life. Also, a lot of people didn't like Stephanie in my last post, but I need you to understand that this is a tiny snapshot of a very emotionally high-strung time in her life, and overall, Stephanie is a wonderful lifelong friend. She's gotten me through so many personal crises over the years, and she will never fail to show up for the people she cares about. Being pregnant and having a strong emotional attachment to the name you've picked out for your daughter is completely understandable, and her pregnancy was pretty rough on her moods. She once wept uncontrollably at a cat food commercial when she was about 7 months pregnant. I also think my approach for trying to explain the name issue those years ago was very clumsy, and I could have done a better job in bringing it up. That said, with the distance of time, I'm really glad I did broach the topic. I feel like I owed Stephanie that information, and I can feel good about giving it to her. If I'd chosen not to bring it up at the time, I think I'd have a lot of regrets now. The only thing I'd change now looking back is that I would try to bring it up more gently somehow with Stephanie so I could have the chance to explain. In summary, all is well. We've run into a little bump in the road with other kids' reactions to Carrie's name, but in some ways, it's better to get this out of the way now, when Carrie doesn't really understand what's happening, than to have this happen in kindergarten or elementary down the road, when full-on bullying could be a risk. She's adjusting really well to going by a nickname full-time, and Stephanie and her husband are planning on enrolling her with Carrie as a preferred name in all future schooling. And since schools around here go by preferred name rather than legal name in things like classroom roll calls, it's possible she can get through K-12 without it ever really being widely known among her peers that her legal name is Karen, and I really hope this common usage of the name Karen dies down in the next few years. Edit. Really disappointed to be getting hate messages directed at Carrie, wishing that terrible things befall her and calling her the C word. Please remember she's an innocent child. Edit 2. Point of clarification. The boys at daycare apparently didn't know that Karen was a name. The way they heard it used at home made them think it was just a term used to insult people and that it might be a bad word. That's why they found it so funny, because in their worldview, it was like meeting someone named Fartface or Arsehole. The daycare staff explained to them that Karen is a real name, and that lots of people are named Karen, and of course they tried their best to curtail the mockery, but nothing really helped until the name change and a little bit of time passed. Things at the daycare now are back to normal. The other kids are calling her Carrie, and everyone has, fortunately, moved on. Edit 3. Please don't harass Redditors who gave you all the a-hole judgment on my first post. They gave their honest judgment at the time in an online space specifically set up for that purpose. I didn't post on an advice sub, I posted on a judgment sub, and there's no reason to call people to the mat for judgments I asked for, made in good faith from 3 years ago. And there was a commenter who was criticizing Stephanie, and OP responded to that saying Stephanie is genuinely a great friend and a good person. She once dropped everything and drove 300 miles because I'd just been in a relatively minor car accident in a city I lived all alone in as a young adult. She once gifted me $1,500, no questions asked, and insisted I never think about paying it back when I needed to get out of a really bad cohabiting situation while broke. When we were teenagers and the cool boy she had a massive crush on made fun of me for something I was extremely sensitive about, instead of keeping quiet, she blew her top, stuck up for me and told him off, then led me away to comfort me away from him. She is loyal and kind and has an incredible character. This post is such a tiny snapshot of who she is as a person. When I raised my concerns, Stephanie was emotional, very pregnant, and somewhat sleep deprived. Her pregnancy was rough on her body, and on top of hormones, I think she was just genuinely confused by what I was trying to tell her. Final update. For those of you who have contacted me asking for an update, I wanted to circle back and close the book on the baby Karen/Carrie chapter. As of last month, Carrie is now legally Caroline in last name, and she has even been issued with a new birth certificate for a new legal name. The daycare bullying issues had already died down since Stephanie and her husband switched to calling her Carrie, but this legal name change now means that the Karen issue won't crop up again when she starts school. There were also some other minor incidents that pushed Stephanie and her husband to make that decision around the legal name change. They were getting to the point where almost at any time they were having to provide Karen's legal name to get a service. They were getting an immediate reaction, even from adults. It was usually just a meaningful look, but Barb's comments were not unusual. The final straw was when they were at the airport getting ready to fly to visit Stephanie's in-laws with Carrie. The TSA agent at security made a snarky comment, and then later when they needed to ask the gate agent about their seats, the gate agent rudely laughed at seeing Carrie's ticket and showed the gate agent standing next to her, who just shook her head and said, "Poor kid," to a co-worker, while fully ignoring Stephanie and her husband. And they had this interaction in front of Carrie. Something about that day in the airport was a turning point for Stephanie and her husband, and they started the name change process as soon as they got home. It was much easier than they were expecting and cost a grand total of $30. Carrie is a joyful, sociable little girl, and while it's impossible to know right now if these negative experiences caused any lasting damage, I sincerely hope they did not. I'm happy to see that she continues to be a very outgoing, confident child. The conversation with Stephanie I mentioned in October update was awkward and brief, but we've actually gotten back into it a few times since. Stephanie has apologized profusely for her initial reaction when we first talked. I've apologized for approaching things so poorly and not telling her right away about what our friends were saying behind her back, and in those conversations we mainly ended up focusing on the results spiraling of my mum and aunt and what a mess that turned into. Together we started to unpack some of the intergenerational shit around our family issues. To provide some of that context, our maternal grandparents were a nightmare. Our grandfather was an authoritarian, revivalist preacher who was physically abusive and referred to himself as the spiritual leader, an ultimate authority of the family. Our grandmother was a manipulative narcissist who psychologically tormented my mum and aunt for their entire childhoods. As a result, my mum and aunt trauma bonded considerably during their childhood and grew into extremely anxious and reactive adults. Any whiff of conflict sends them into panic mode, and in our family, we have these well-worn gloves of behavioral habits with my mum and aunt overreacting to anything that feels like discord and scrambling to clumsily smooth things over. As a result, Stephanie and I have both been working hard to build better boundaries with our mum's generation and have agreed to be really cautious about what information we give them, especially anything that is highly emotional. I've been in therapy for a couple of years now, and Stephanie also started therapy late last year. We've been talking about the ways that my grandparents traumatizing our mums caused intergenerational issues that impacted us, and Stephanie is determined the cycle ends with her, and that these issues will not go on to touch Carrie. Thank you everyone for your kind words, both here on my profile posts and on the best of update reposts, which I've also been reading. I've gotten some incredibly thoughtful and kind messages which have meant a lot to me, even if I haven't had the chance to respond to all of them. For those who still want to be critical of Stephanie, I again want to emphasize how out of character her initial reaction was, and how much physical, hormonal, and emotional upheaval she was in at the time. These posts are a teeny tiny window into just one aspect of the dynamic, funny, kind, caring, full human being that is my cousin and best friend. Stephanie has been my most loyal and trusted friend for pretty much my entire life, and she has fully earned some grace for reacting less than perfectly to my extremely clumsy approach when she was sleep deprived, hormonally wrecked, and brain fogged. Stephanie has read these posts now as well, along with all of your comments, and after I explained to her what Reddit is, they were helpful to both of us in our talks about our weird family dynamic. I can't imagine I'll have any more updates down the line, but thank you for following along the last few years. And I can remember after the very first post the last time around when OP was voted You're the A-hole and being confused by that, remembering that that first post was 4 years ago. I can't remember if the meme was around, if that was the beginning of the meme or it was already around for a year or so before that. I cannot remember. The last 4 years for myself was absolutely fucking wild as well, so I can barely remember last week. But I do remember being quite shocked about it being overwhelmingly You're the A-hole in that situation. But what I really loved about reading this post and OP talking about their friendship with Stephanie and the language used from OP and the way that they approach things was just sounds like a wonderful, wholesome human being. And I'm just incredibly relieved that it didn't damage OP's relationship with Stephanie, because it sounds like a real special one. But now I'm going to turn this one to you guys. What do you guys make of this situation? Let me know your thoughts down in the comments below. And just a huge thank you for spending your time with me today. Getting involved in the stories really means the world to me, so thank you so much, and hopefully we'll see you in the next one. Take care and much love.